Our text today talks about there being a time for everything. Evidently, some people read that ahead of time and said, well, there's a time to miss church. I see empty seats. Now, they may fill in yet, so I'm not looking at you because you're here, right? So here we go. We ended the last chapter, and Solomon, or the one robing himself as Solomon, was sort of fixated on mortality, on death. So let me get our death screen up here. Death was the intruder from the future that sort of crashed the party for Solomon's life. Solomon kept turning the hourglass over and over, and he knew the day would come eventually for him to die. We cited Woody Allen a couple of times also, and he was, I was going to call him the Dr. Kevorkian of comedy because he talked about death so much, but Dr. Kevorkian was helping people to die, and I think Woody Allen was afraid to die. In fact, here's one thing he said: life is full of misery, loneliness, and suffering, and it's over much too soon. Well, here is 87 years old now, and he wrote this as a hypochondriac over 50 years ago. Well, the key word in today's passage is time. You get that from, it's over much too soon, like when, how does all this fit together? So here's time. Time, well, you can imagine that a book whose theme is frustration, that eventually it will bring up this issue of time, because time is a massive pressure and it's kind of an unknown in life, at least not for the very young, and maybe for the very old don't care so much about their clock. But wouldn't it be great for the day when all the clocks would be outlawed? Well, some of you don't even wear a watch anymore, so it's all on your phone, right? But let's think about that a little bit. You might have heard of Horace Whittle. Horace was a dock worker in Gillingham, England, and for 47 years, he hated his alarm clock. For 47 years, early in the morning, in the dark, it would jangle him awake, and for 47 years, he tried to ignore it or wish that he could just punch it off the nightstand. But for 47 years, he submitted to the tyranny of the little dictator. So now, the day of his retirement, it's time for revenge. So in an act of what he called delicious revolution, he takes his little dictator to work with him and to show him what he'd had to endure for 47 years, and that's where he flattens his alarm clock between the greedy jaws of his 80-ton hydraulic press. And he said, it was a lovely filing. Now, that's what I call reversing the pressure. So we're going to talk about time, but let's get it clear from the beginning. When Solomon talks about time and seasons, he's not quite thinking about time as the unstoppable stream of seconds and minutes and hours that add up to days and weeks and months and go on decades and years. Let's not skip years. Years, decades, let's see what comes next, centuries and millennia. When we think of seasons, we sort of think of repetitive things like a baseball season or the seasons of the year that cycle through. Like the woman who said, Ralph, the garden tools are starting to peek up through the snow. So that's the seasons. He spent the next hour kind of depressed, wondering what would make her call me Ralph. Anyway, seasons here are like seasons of suffering. They're like seasons of growth. They're seasons of education, things like that, or stagnation, or times of upheaval, even single events, whether good or bad. So he uses the term time more like our question, is it time now? So when somebody asks that, you don't just, check your watch and answer. Of course, it's always time. It's 10:12 right now. No, that question means, is there something that needs to happen at this time? Is it time now for that to happen? So he's talking about the events of our life, how they fit into the stream of time. So what Solomon is thinking about is the succession of life happenings that we mostly try to keep in our control. So we have a couple of ways to do this. We could just mark the hours with it could be an hourglass, but of course we use a watch or something like that. Nowadays, all of this is on your phone, so if this doesn't make sense to some people, a calendar, what is that? Anyway, your watch, your calendar, everything's all in one device. But it used to be you'd had a couple of things. You check your clock for the stream of time, but as far as events go, you would check your day timer. What's scheduled for today? You get up in the morning and say, okay, what do I have to do today? And you have times laid out for the various things if you're organized. And we try to squeeze and schedule and make order out of our lives by doing that. But we've all noticed that often events end up a lot more random than we expected or that we planned, because interruptions occur and, diapers have to be changed and at inappropriate times. There's never an appropriate time for that, but anyway. And then, we get sick or injured, and that changes things. We had a vacation we were going to go on, but now we can't do it. We hadn't planned on our hard drive crashing. We didn't really figure that traffic jams would be as bad as they were, so stuff gets mixed up, and we have to question how much control we actually have over our lives. Well, Solomon is going to answer our wondering with a powerful and poetic description of the events of life, and he's going to let us in on life's scariest, hairiest, but also most comforting secret. And so we get it here as we start into chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes, which happens to be the theme of songs that like from the Byrds, most famously, but even more contemporary. We have Austin. Is Austin here? Austin, okay, here he is. So Austin Shins, who there's a note on this in the new, it will be on the newsletter for FBC where you can tune in on this, but he wrote a song for a choral piece called Under Heaven, and it starts out with the words of this chapter. So shout out to Austin for that. Okay, so here we go. For there is a season for everything, and a time for every matter under heaven. The King James had every purpose under heaven. A time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to tear out what was planted. Maybe you're doing some of that here in your spring gardening. Time to kill and a time to heal. Time to tear down and a time to build up. Time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. Time to cast stones and a time to gather stones. Nobody knows what that means. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. Time to search, that is in order to acquire and accumulate. And a time to count your losses. Time to keep and a time to throw away. Time to rip apart and a time to sew together. Time to keep quiet. I was going to translate this, a time to shut up and a time to speak up, but that would be irreverent to do that. So it's a time to keep quiet and a time to speak up. And verse 8, a time to love and a time to hate. Time to wage war and a time to make peace. Poetry. Okay, let's not wait. So here's the hairy, scary secret. The teacher uncovers something here that most people sort of know deep inside somehow, although that they may not want to admit it or they haven't really consciously thought about it, but it's that when you get up in the morning, the universe is already scheduled. Nate, not by Shauna. It happens to be scheduled by the wisest, kindest person who exists, who you might have thought was Shauna, but it is God himself who has every right to do this. And, he made it all, after all. He made everything. And so here's God controlling everything. It's not in our control. You might know Proverbs 19:21. It says, many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand, that will actually get done. There's a season for everything, he says here, and a time for every matter under heaven. So just highlight a couple of words there, everything and every. It's already planned out. The appointments are made. And this is a mystery that I will probably not explain to everyone's satisfaction. I'm not even going to try to explain it. I'm going to just exalt it. A lot of people read this passage wrong. And so don't get the wrong idea here. The teacher is not saying there's a time for this and a time for its opposite so that you will keep things in kind of a wholesome balance between, let's say, weeping and laughing, or between, the reason it doesn't mean that is like I'll keep a wholesome balance between killing and healing, Really? That's not what it's saying. Um, it's not like all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Or like you've wept enough, through the work week, and now you've got this long weekend, and now it's time to laugh as you what? Well, Memorial Day weekend says you go to, so you go to the graveyard with flowers. Anyway, that didn't really work. But you can stash away only so much, so, let's balance it out. Now is the time to clean out the attic, and so you can fill it up with other stuff that you're going to throw away some other time. But this is not a sermon on human balance. This is a sermon on God's providence. Providence, not fate, providence. This is God at work. Charles Spurgeon preached a sermon on this when he was in Ezekiel chapter 1, where you got the wheels within the wheels. You wonder what that's about? That's God governing the universe. And so here's what he said. I believe that every particle of dust that dances in the sunbeam does not move an atom more or less than God wishes. Whatever God ordains must be, but the wisdom of God never ordains anything without a purpose. Fate simply says the thing must be. Providence says God moves the wheels along, and there they are. If anything would go wrong, God puts it right. Fate is a blind thing. The doctrine of providence is not what is must be, but that what is works together for the good of our race, and especially for the good of the chosen people of God. And then he goes on to spill out and explain what that purpose is, and we know what it is. God's purpose is the exaltation of his Son and the coronation of Jesus Christ before those to whom and for whom he is conforming them to the image of the great Son through every event of life. Romans 8:28 and all of that. Spurgeon didn't make this up. You can go to Isaiah, you could go to Ezekiel, you go to various places in the New Testament. Here's one from Isaiah 46. Remember the former things of old, for I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand and I will accomplish all my purpose. All right, now, you're reading Ecclesiastes, you're not reading Isaiah. You're reading Ecclesiastes, and look, the teacher is lamenting that the universe is beyond human control. Just think about it. Can we submit to a plan that we honestly only want half of? Because did you notice that the list contains pairs of opposites? Usually one good and one bad. We don't always know which one is bad or good. Is it better to speak up or keep quiet? Depends on the situation, I would think. But I might put birth on my day timer, but I'm not going to put a death on there. Maybe I'll put it in later as a record of it. But healing, not killing. Building, not demolishing. Laughing and dancing, sure, but not weeping and mourning. I don't schedule those. Like, I got to have a bunch of that. Loving and embracing and making peace, yes. Give me months of that without any interruptions for the occasional war and bloodshed and sleeping on the couch. Well, let's think about this. Half the things on this list I have a hard time wanting or accepting. I didn't ask for them. There are actually 14 pairs covering most aspects of life from cradle to grave. In the Bible, multiples of 7 usually depict completeness. So this is your life, your whole life, a tapestry of your times, both good and bad. Do you see it? And so let's put down for kind of a first point here, and there's a word to fill out in your notes. It goes like this. You can expect good times and bad times no matter how well you plan. And sometimes they overlap. Like I remember when my son Stephen was born, it was while my mother was dying. Or like yesterday, went to the memorial service for Linda Glessner, who had died. And that meant that we were going to be late. BJ and I went to that, and then we needed to go to the graduation for our granddaughter, Audrey, who was graduating from POU from the nursing program. So we go to that, and here she has a job in the NICU helping newborns live. And same day, here we are, death and life. How does that all work? Graduate, 2 different kinds of graduations. Look at the first pair: a time to give birth, a time to die. These are God's to choose. They're not really in our control, although we have something we arrogantly call birth control. We have Planned Parenthood. But you, in fact, may give no birth if you have infertility in your marriage. You may just have a series of miscarriages. Sort of like my aunt, who never had a living child, bore 3 sons into the world, all dead. Or you may get living triplets. I mean, do you really decide that? Do we enjoy this lack of freedom? That's the question. Or is it a tragic frustration, like it seems to be for the writer of Ecclesiastes? I will admit, most days I'd rather be in control myself. I mean, when I just get up and I don't really think about it. I said, I'm going to plan this day. And I don't like too many surprises, but I cannot play God. Playing God looks like this: abortion. That's playing God. Sex changes. That's playing God. An arrogant attempt to dethrone God and put myself in control of something that is really God's part. Philosopher James Sennett wrote this. In fact, he at one time taught at POU. He said, our striving after wind is motivated by a sinister desire to be independent of God, free from the frightening vulnerability of his watch care, that is, oversight. If we really do leave the securing of the universe up to him, there's no telling what he might pull. When God calls the shots, people turn into prophets, mountains get cast into the sea, and dead men come back to life. Better we should be in control and have some idea what is coming next. We will keep things on an even keel. We so desire. I can't help but feel that the second coming itself would be an inconvenience for many of us. Well, the real God is way too wild for us. We'd rather have him on a leash or kind of synced to our day timer so that things work the way we really plan them. Well, Solomon starts applying these observations by asking a question. Verse 9. What does a worker really get for all his hard work? Well, the teacher is thinking that in the end, it really doesn't matter too much what you get done. You wouldn't work so hard at things, however, if you weren't imagining some sort of payoff. But then your payday could evaporate because of some act of God. Is that in your insurance policy? Acts of God. So your farm work is profitless if, let's say, hail flattens your crop, or you plan a beautiful wedding in the winter wedding and then it snows so hard nobody could get there. You slave and save for your retirement and then you get laid off early and you can't get rehired anywhere because you're so old, and then you've used up all your money before you're 65. Oh man, if you're looking for self-sufficiency, you came to the wrong universe. You can't even guess God's timetable, let alone control it. Things have happened in your life. You never planned a life like you're living. Things that you've gone through, you would never, ever have put them on your schedule. People are desperate, however, to know what is coming. And so they open a fortune cookie, or they go to a palm reader, consult a horoscope, a crystal ball, whatever. You can just put a gravestone right over the top of all your confidence that you can control your life and make it turn out by your own efforts. BJ and I talk, okay, which one of us wants to die first? And neither one of us will volunteer. But God knows. So you have to sort of postpone your position as proud prognosticator. You can't do that. So we think that we are clever enough to kind of manage outcomes. And we don't really believe what we read in the Bible. It reminds me of a little riddle. You'll have to follow closely here, and I'll go through this fast, and I know you'll get this because you're all so sharp. If you want to fail at something and then you actually do fail, have you actually succeeded? If so, then you failed to fail, which is a failure, though a successful one. Or to take the other side, what if you wanted to fail, but you succeed? Have you then failed to fail? And so that is indeed a failure after all, which makes it a success because that's what you wanted to do in the first place. Am I making any sense yet? There's more. In this case, your success is a failure, though also a successful one, which goes to show that a losing attitude guarantees you will both win and lose. Because if you lose, you have succeeded by failing, and if you win, you have failed to fail, which is also a success in your book. In contrast, a winning attitude could either lead to success or failure, 50-50. So let that be a lesson to you. If you want to make sure you win, try to lose. All right, now the end of that, all that foolishness is this, that it is a recognition, very simply, that you cannot control the outcome. All you can do is try to govern your attitude a little bit. Really? Isn't that what it's about? You are not actually in charge. So let's kind of agree to that. Later on, I'll have you all say that to your soul. Your soul. You are not in charge. Okay. But God is. And that's the blessing and the comfort of all this, because he's more competent than we are. And here's where faith comes in. The teacher says, if you could look at the life deeply enough, you'd see the fittingness and the beauty of life's events. So here's where we read verse 10. I've observed the assignment God has given the sons of men to be occupied with. He has made everything suitable in its time. Some translations have beautiful in its time, fitting. It's like something beautiful that just absolutely fits exactly where it should be. And you look at that and say, that's beautiful. All right, so here we go. Here's the point. God is beautifully in control of all these times. This is a fundamental conviction from the Bible. I mean, it's all over the Bible. It runs all the way through the Bible. For instance, the account of Israel's past, as told in the Old Testament, is not a record of, the rise and fall of empires and social and political intrigue, humans clashing and heroes rising and falling. No, it is the story of God's dealings, a God of grace and judgment, promises kept, predictions made and fulfilled, warnings enforced, how he moved time along to the end he designed, and ultimately to the coming of a Redeemer Messiah, his own son. And so to use Paul's words from Galatians 4:4, in the fullness of the time, God sent his son, born of a woman. Jesus came. So here's the eternal invading the temporal. Here's Jesus himself announcing that the times and the seasons are all in the Father's control. Acts 1:7, times and epochs that the Father has fixed in his own authority. They're going to come to pass as God designed them. And God then is controller of the master calendar, master of the ultimate day timer, and he makes everything turn out beautifully. Beautifully. Now, you can see it. That is, if you have God's eye for it. Then it's a source of delight, not depression. It's an elegance to God's work that is not always apparent except to the eye of faith, even the bad times. Eventually, we're going to get to chapter 7, verse 14. When things are going well for you, be glad. And when trouble comes, just remember, God made the one as well as the other. You never know what's going to happen next. So God has a good and beautiful, pleasant purpose for everything, but it's not pleasant to go through it. I'm not implying that. But in the end, it's exactly what it should have been. Everything happens in our lives for that good and beautiful purpose. For the good and the bad weave together to make us exactly what we were created to be. Exactly. Both the hardest trial and the time of peaceful prosperity, he made one as well as the other. All right. Film clip. By the way, the movies that we show clips from, we are not endorsing the whole movie. So if you watch one of them, you say, I can't believe they did that. Okay, well, never mind. I'm just letting you know. So we're going to see a film clip from Bruce Almighty. It's one of the few movies named after me. So anyway, here's Bruce Nolan, and he's played by Jim Carrey, and he's stuck in a job that he hates, and he screams at God for doing a lousy job with his life. And so God decides to give Bruce a chance to do a better job being God. So, by the way, the main takeaway of this whole movie is it ain't easy being God, all right? So Bruce gets to be God for a few days in Buffalo, New York. Just a small amount of the universe, but there it is. And one thing God has to do is answer prayers. If you've seen this movie, it's just hilarious how prayers are coming in like mad, and he gets so behind in handling the millions of prayers that he decides just to do it on an email system and just answer all the prayers with a select all yes. Remember that? because he's too lazy to figure out what people actually need. So, so most of the people are delighted with that. The lady that loses 40 pounds on the Krispy Kreme diet, and the others that so many people win the lottery, actually, that they only get about $17 each. But not everyone's yes ends up being a good thing. And there are a couple of samples that I want to show you from deleted scenes. These are not in the movie. And so in this clip, you're also going to see the real God played by Morgan Freeman, who is disguised as a janitor, giving Bruce a rare behind-the-scenes look at the tapestry of times. All right. I think they stopped that so they can get the sound going.
$1,527,503. All right, okay. Now we'll start with something easy. Sports. Sabres. Please let the Sabres win the playoffs. Please let the Red Wings beat the Sabres. Oh, that's easy. Home team, yes. Visitors, how do you spell? Oh. All right, here we're going now. Filbert Davis, gym class. Let me get a visual on this.
Come on, fatty Filbert. My grandma can climb higher than you.
Pretend there's a hot dog up there.
Oh, God, please help me.
Don't worry, Filbert. Help is on the way.
Oh, my gosh.
Esther Maha, read bankruptcy. I don't think so. Not on my watch.
Are you all right?
I think so.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Stay down, stay down. I'm a lawyer.
You're doing some good here. It is right to give me thanks and praise.
No matter how filthy something gets, you can always clean it right up.
There were so many. I just gave them all what they wanted.
Yeah. Since when does anyone have a clue about what they want? You remember Filbert?
Yeah, Filbert. What's gotten into him?
Brilliant young man. He was going to be a great poet. The soul of his work would have been built around his childhood pain. Now he's headed for a career as a professional wrestler. He will eventually test positive for steroids and end up managing a muffler shop.
Well, that's a disappointment.
He got what he prayed for. Esther Maha. I love Esther. Esther was bankrupt. She was going to have to eat her pride and call her sister. That would have gotten the two of them together again. Instead, she bought a condo in South Florida.
There are going to be a lot of these.
Just one more.
Hey, that's Lance Armstrong. He won the Tour de France. He's won it 4 or 5 times in a row.
Overcame a lot to do it, too.
I didn't.
No. Well, that was me and him. You see, Bruce, triumph is born out of struggle. Faith is the alchemist. If you want to paint pictures like this, you have to use some dark colors.
Some dark colors. Some of us know that. You know, Bruce found out a couple of things here. Not only was it not easy being God, it's not easy being Bruce. So, do you really know what you want or need? I mean, really. But God does. If you look behind the scenes of all your prayers, you know, what do you see? If you could really see it, you would see some sense and beauty to it. You would possibly stop complaining when you don't get exactly what you prayed for, what you thought you needed, just because you would see how it all fits with the bigger plan. So why do we somehow know that this is true, that this is the case, that there's a bigger picture where everything makes sense? Well, even without the Bible and connecting ourselves to all of that, deep in our hearts, we know this is a timeless reality. Look at the middle of verse 11. He has set eternity in their hearts. Solomon sees that God is in control of all the events of time, but also that God has made us aware deep in our hearts that there are eternal realities. He's set eternity in their hearts. That's probably a holdover from creation, from Eden, from how we were made in the image of God, making our hearts a place for forever. Gave us an immortal soul to be housed in a mortal body. And why did the Egyptians make such elaborate burial monuments? Because in their hearts they knew that they would be spending a lot more time after this life than they do in this life. God had placed eternity in their hearts. And that's why we have this feeling that everything's supposed to fit together. Ultimately, it's supposed to fit an eternal plan. All humans have this. People in the grocery store, well, that happened for a reason. Almost anyone will say that. It's because it's hardwired to our souls. Take your dog. Your dog doesn't know this. Dog doesn't sit around trying to figure stuff out. Gets vaguely depressed if he gets fed 20 minutes late, but, with an extra doggy biscuit, he cheers right up. And by the way, no dog we ever had ever stopped to thank God for his kibbles and bits. Didn't even thank me for it. He may bay at the moon, but he's not wondering who put it there. Why it's so beautiful, even though it's just a cold chunk of rock. Minus 264 degrees Fahrenheit by average. A lot of divots in it. Has no other job than just running circles around the earth. You might wonder if your dog sees a dog in the moon. And when he's baying at it, he's saying hello. Well, no, he's not. And the moon doesn't care about the dog either. Your dog's not terribly outraged over the unfairness that his ears are running by 7 times faster than a human. He's not having identity problems because he's named Bozo. And then wondering with horror that he might have to carry this stupid name throughout forever in the great kennel in the sky. He's just not thinking about any of that. But you think about things like that. You have this God-shaped hole in your heart that corresponds to eternity. Fill it with whatever finite thing you might want to, but you will be restless until you finally fill it with him and you fully come alive. So said Augustine many, many moons ago. Well, now here's where the frustration comes in for our teacher. The last part of the verse. Yet they can't fathom from beginning to end what God has done. Humans can't really figure it out, what God has done. Endings, beginnings, causes, effect, consequences. We have an inborn sense that there's an eternal reason, that it's all part of a bigger story, but we haven't got enough to actually see how the details fit. You can only guess why I lost this job and got that one and ended up in this, working in Seattle half my life, and what was going on with that. You don't know all the people that you ran into that you wouldn't have run into, that in the great plan of God, where that was important. We see somebody absurdly happy who has no right to be, and we see people of integrity and goodness who carry the deepest pains. This is part of Ecclesiastes. None of that really makes sense to us. Think of a jigsaw puzzle. Ever tried to do a puzzle without the lid? Unless it's maybe 25 pieces, it's almost impossible. But what if it's not just 1,000 pieces, like the one I have up here? But maybe it's zillions and zillions of pieces. And it's not just 2-dimensional, it's like 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional when you figure that going through time. Because what God is building is eternity. Not, this puzzle was called Death in the Desert. But what if in the end, he sees the picture, but you don't? Well, you're assured that there is such a master picture. There are thousands of connections to every one of us, every one piece. And let's say your life is a piece, but it has let's say 1 million sub-pieces. And there are just mind-blowingly vast aspects to this vast picture. that only God can see, and only he can possibly arrange each piece in its place for the coronation of his Son and the glorification of his people. So from our side, the teacher is thinking this: how frustrating to have a sense of eternity, but without an explanation for how all the pieces fit. The lid is missing, all right? Well, it might feel like divine sabotage. He's made us feel that there's a bigger thing happening all the time, which there is, but he hasn't given us access to the files for the details of that. So we go through things and we don't know why. And we have longings for eternal stuff that we only get small tastes of here in this life. Since we can't see the meaning of the details, then, and partly because we're part of the details. We're one of the pieces. Well, we never get a look at the beginning and the end like God does. I'm like a guy who suddenly is perched on the nose of Abraham Lincoln on Mount Rushmore and asked to figure out which president this one is. And I can't get far enough away to really get a real answer, just a guess. So then why should I know whether this is the best day for building rather than tearing down, for buying rather than selling, for ripping apart rather than sewing? How do I figure all of that out? Well, I don't. I'm in the dark on all of that, and so much maybe seems pointless. But then you might think, well, my life would be on hold. Do I cancel all my appointments and throw away my daytime, or just go sit on Lincoln's nose until God tells me more? Well, let's read this. I concluded that there's nothing better for people to do than to be joyful, not depressed, but joyful, and do the best they can as long as they live. Moreover, that if everyone eats and drinks and finds good in his work, it's a gift from God. Chapter 2 again, from last week. So what is man's daily duty in light of forever? It is responsible joy. In other words, the teacher knew that even if he couldn't understand or see everything God does, he could still enjoy what God gives. And what he gives are simple daily pleasures, like eating and drinking and finding good in your work, tokens of a contented life. They're the things that God himself has given us. And so let's add this. God gifts us in every season with common joys. And joys like marriage, joys like music. I was feeling kind of the weight of some grief. So I was mowing the lawn this week, and in my earphones, I was hearing a song, choral music, When David Heard. It's the name of the song. When David Heard. And those words are repeated at the beginning. When David heard that Absalom was slain, his son Absalom. And then it has a little phrase there where it says, he went up into his chamber and wept. And the way that is written, and the harmony and the voices and all that, I cannot listen to that without tears being squeezed out of my soul. Why am I saying that? Because even soul-pulsing beauty can come over you in times of anguish. And God gives us music for that, to express and help us feel what we ought to be feeling at a certain time. I could go on and on with common joys of every day, going on a walk, just sitting there looking at a tree. It's nothing so beautiful as a tree. You all know that. Enjoy things while you can. You can be genuinely thankful for all of those things because we are factoring in God's sovereignty, because his choice, he has given that to us. God may not answer all my questions, but that is not a door slammed in my face. When I don't have answers, I still have him. And that is such an important thing to remember. If we don't remember that, then we protest the things that we can't understand, things we can't change. We get bitter over disappointments, and we miss out on the joy of those many blessings that he gave us, even though we didn't deserve even one of them. We'll look at verses 14 and 15 for our last point. I know that whatever God does is final. It's going to last forever. Nothing can be added to it or taken from it. God's purpose in this is that people should fear him. Fear him, revere him, see him as awesome. That which is already has been, and which is to be, that which is to be already is, and God seeks out what has gone by. Now, as I enjoy life, and here's something that will comfort my soul. When God does something, it is so perfect, it is final, it's complete, this is it. So it's like the opus that God has written, the music that he has given. I was just wondering about Austin Shen, as he wrote that song, does he listen to that and he think, oh, I wish I had ended it like this, or they're in the middle, that I missed a chord there that would have made this perfect. God does it perfect. Nothing needs to be changed. We can trust God to be God of everything and of all the things that I was wanting to control. That's when we quit complaining, fidgeting, and we just simply worship God in holy fear. Revere him. Tell him he's awesome, because he is. Now, we don't understand how our will and God's will fit together and all of that. But I want to tell you that it's not some blind, friendless, cold thing. So I want to read a little story here. You might have heard me read this before. Story of my son Stephen driving on the beach, and the title of it is Who's Driving Anyway? A parable, homespun, modest parable of freedom, sovereignty, and joy. Being in the will of God is like unto a certain father and a certain son who went on a summer adventure. During our vacation one August, I went with 10-year-old son Stephen out to Jerry and Cheryl Vorpal's beach house to lend a hand with some remodeling they were doing. We pitched a tent on the lawn and slept each night with the roaring surf just yards away. During the day, we'd periodically take a break from work to hit golf balls out in the flat beach, the world's largest sand trap. But our favorite thing was driving down to Mo Clips, where we could take the car out on the sand and I could pass the steering wheel to Stephen. He had his first taste of driving. After the third day, he was ready to take on the Washington State driver's exam, if not the Indy 500. Well, I don't think so. You see, Stephen's feet couldn't reach the pedals. Or if they did, he couldn't see over the dashboard. So he had a choice. Dad would either be his eyes or his feet. He chose the latter, so he sat on my lap. And he drove up and down that beach, eating up sand like a razor clam at low tide. You can imagine the bemused looks coming from beachcombers watching the sandy-haired, freckle-faced, pug-nosed boy getting his first driving lesson. And it was a lesson. He found out that a Ford Taurus is not a dune buggy, so if you want to spin a donut, you have to let Dad ease off the gas a little before you crank the wheel. He learned that the other people on the beach didn't come 200 miles to be intimidated by a runaway Ford product. They came there to relax. So Stephen learned to temper his driving when he got near people, to trim his trajectory so they didn't have to worry that he was suddenly going to pulverize their sandcastle or inadvertently run a Michelin over their legs, ruining the tan they'd been working on all afternoon. Within such guidelines, Stephen had a ball. He didn't hit one piece of driftwood. He didn't roll the car. He didn't terrify one tourist, though he did make life miserable for Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Once he got the rules down, he drove wherever he wanted. I didn't have to urge him to drive fast or do crazy zigzags or slaloms. He was a free spirit having the time of his life. I had a ball too. I wouldn't have been anywhere else. He thought driving was easy. He even had the illusion of doing it all by himself. What freedom to move like that across the sand, to swerve and turn ferociously and then wave at the same friendly family from Bellingham over and over. But now here's the kicker. Stephen just had no idea how hard I was working underneath him to make sure he didn't kill himself and me or any innocent bystanders. For him to have freedom, the freedom I wanted him to have, I was using my feet like the pipe organist at St. Mark's Cathedral, hitting the brakes so he'd be going slow enough to miss a log he hadn't seen soon enough, steadying the speed around an oblivious tourist who looked a little nervous when she looked up and saw the look of an Andretti sitting in my lap. My reassuring smile helped ease such moments. Sometimes I had to stop the car completely when I realized Stephen's concentration had waned and he was getting dangerously sloppy. Twice I had to actually grab the wheel to avert disaster. What a time. Wherever Stephen went, I went. Who was driving the beach those days? You tell me. All I know is this blue-eyed son was perfectly in the will of his father, and his father was delighting in the will of his son. So be it. All right, so I think you get it. Here's a Father God who fixes our times and does so mysteriously and with great delight. Trust him and fear him. But know this, that the joy of this is only for those humble enough to sit in the Father's lap. I mean, Stephen could have said, no, I don't want to sit in your lap. I just want to do it on myself. Then he would not have done it at all. There is no other path left to us. God sees it from a vantage point, past, future, present, very real to him all at once. In a riddle, the teacher has said what? That which is already has been, that which is to be already is, and God seeks out what has gone by. That last phrase, we don't know exactly what that means. It could mean, like the ESV has it, what has been drawn away. Did I write that down right? Driven away, that's it. Yeah, my handwriting isn't great here. What has been driven away. And that's the idea. Some people feel like that's the oppressed people. That's people that have been, and God looks after them. So what God seeks out, what has been driven away, people that need his special care, and no one did. Or it could mean things happen the same way over and over again. Or it could mean, as the NIV has it, God calls the past into account. Let's just say it's something like this. When BJ's making a pie, she lays the crust in the pie plate, and there's stuff slopped all over the side, but in the end, she uses a tool of some kind or a knife, and she cuts it all into a perfect circle. And just think of God. Not a corner of time or space God is not intimately involved in. And whatever might have been out of kilter, he makes it right. You just ask, I wonder what God's going to do with that one. So, God's sovereign providence calls for humility and trust. You're filling these words in, right? Some of you are just sitting there like you don't know what the notes are for. So you can do that. I know you can do that. God is secretly and wisely in charge of everything. And that is the greatest comfort for us to deal with. But you have to deal with your pride. And you have to deal with your fears. Deal with your pride like this. You say to your soul, you are not in charge. If you care to say that with me, say that right now. Soul, you are not in charge. Say it louder if you want to. Soul, you are not in charge. And then say this, and there's the humility part. So trust and humility. That's the humility part. Now the trust. It sounds like this. God, now you talk to him, not you. God, I trust you with all my times. All right? Say it with me if you want to. God, I trust you with all my times. Say it louder. God, I trust you with all my times. Emphasize the word all. God, I trust you with all my times. That's harder to say because I know some of you are going through a season of severe suffering. It's hard to say. Well, here we go. Kind of a summation here. The whole range of life is beyond our control. It's on the back of your notes. We can't make it all fit. Wanting freedom on our terms costs us true freedom on God's terms. Whatever freedom we have comes through joyful humility and submissive trust. Whether it's weeping or laughing, tearing up or planting in, all of these things, whatever it is. Mourning and weeping. I don't see a lot of people weeping here, but some of you may want to. Here's Jim Carrey, at this point, not trying to be funny. He just says, if we all acted the way we really felt, 4 out of 8 people at a dinner table would be sitting there sobbing. But God has not left us defenseless during times of adversity. Some of you have been to see the sequoias in California. And one time there was a fire coming, and hundreds of people spontaneously drove up to the mountains to try to protect those trees. But that was not necessary because these giants stand almost 300 feet tall, 35 feet at the base. If you examine a cross-section, you discover that they're so many years old, but the trees they've been able to examine, they realize that they have gone through at least 200 major fires without anybody to protect them. So how do they stand the flames that are consuming lesser species around them? Well, the secret is their bark, because these giant sequoias have bark that's not 2 inches, not 3 inches, 5 inches a foot, that's 2 feet thick. And all the way around. This is how God designed these giants to survive the time of fire. So here is what I want to say. The bark around you is the sovereignty of God. The God you can trust, the God you can fear, the God before whom you are humble. The sovereignty of God. And I don't mean the doctrine per se, that is a comfort too, but God himself, he is the fortress of your heart. Yeah. But when you know and surrender to the kingship of God, then you can go through stuff. Let me give you a short sample of that from Lisa Beamer. Her husband, Todd Beamer, died on 9/11 in one of those planes, the plane that came down in Pennsylvania. Guy that said, let's roll. So when you're left alone, you're a mother of two, you want to cope with life. Well, here's what she said to her soul. Who are you, Lisa, to question God and say you have a better plan? You don't have the same wisdom and knowledge that he has, or the understanding of the big picture. You think you deserve a happy life and get angry when it doesn't happen like that. In fact, you are a sinner and deserve only death. The fact that God has offered you a hope for eternal life is amazing. You should be overwhelmed with joy and gratitude. And there you have in that statement humility and trust. To have some profound idea of how God is involved in our times, I think that grows with years of walking with him. But the truest freedom and joy comes when you can let God be in charge of it all. If we are sure of God, we can laugh at ourselves. We know how to trust him, even when it's time to weep. As William Temple said, it's a big mistake to think that God is chiefly interested in religion. No, he's involved in it all. So let eternity fill all parts of the present with meaning. So I have one last thing to read. Mark Buchanan tells a story about a conversation he had with a young philosophy student. Maybe there's somebody like that in this room today. Healthy, good-looking young man in his early 20s. Mark had just officiated at a wedding on a gorgeous day in British Columbia, not far from here. And at the reception, the student asked Mark if he really believed all the stuff that he had just spouted in, the stuff that he had said at the church. And Mark writes, I said I did. He smirked. I asked him what he believed. And he said, I tried your religion for a while. I found it's just a burden to carry. You know what I figured out? Life justifies living. Life is its own reward and explanation. I don't need some pie-in-the-sky mirage to keep me going. This life has enough pleasure and mystery and adventure in it not to need anything else to account for it. Life justifies living. And I guess it just means that it provides its own reason for itself. It's enough. And so, good, I said. This is Mark speaking. Very good, and I believe you today, here, now. Feel the warmth of that breeze. Listen to the laughter of those people. Smell the spiciness of that shrimp cooking. Look at the blueness of the sky. Yesterday, I believe you. What a superb philosophy. Life justifies living. Bravo. Only I'm thinking about somebody I met last February, Richard. Richard was 44, looked 60, had been living on the streets since he was 12. He was a junkie. To support his habit, he was a male prostitute until he got too old and ugly and diseased for that. Now he has AIDS. And the last time I saw Richard was on a gray, rainy day in winter. I bought him a bus ticket, put him on a bus. He was going to his mother's home in Calgary. He hadn't spoken with her in almost 15 years, but he was hoping he could go home to die. Almost incoherent, he sputtered, I wish I'd never been born. My whole life has been a mistake. My whole life has been misery. So I'm thinking about Richard, and I'm thinking about Ernie. Ernie was a man on the rise while he was in his 20s. He was already vice president of a thriving national business. He was tough-minded, hard-driving, prodigiously skilled, hugely ambitious. He was a superb athlete, a natural at any sport. He had a beautiful wife. They were unable to have children of their own, so they adopted 4, 3 from Africa and 1 from Mexico. On the day that 4th adoption became final, Ernie got the results back from some medical tests he had undergone to account for some dizziness, blurring vision, and tingling in his hands. The test came back with stunning news. Ernie had multiple sclerosis. So yes, I'm thinking about Richard and Ernie. And I have a question about your philosophy. How exactly do I explain to them that life justifies living? And the young philosophy student had no response. He said he'd have to think about it and get back to me. I gave him my address and asked him to write me when he came up with something. I never heard from him. Because life does not justify living. Eternity does. Eternity does. So when the eternal day dawns and the God of all time and history flips over the lid of the great giant puzzle called eternity, there you will see a 3D real-life picture, the real thing, of the Son, Jesus Christ, the Lion and the Lamb, with all of us on our knees before him. And we will all be like him because we will see him as he is. And that's when every piece will make perfect sense. Let's pray. Father, we bow before you as our maker, our designer, our God for every moment of our life, for the good times and the bad times, for the stuff we're going through right now that maybe has many blessings in it, but a lot of dark colors too. We take this time of worship to surrender to you as the only one that we can go to, who has the words of eternal life and life itself. The meaning is not clear for us a lot of times, but you are still there. So we humble ourselves and we trust you. May that be true of all of us. In Christ's name.